for coming to the public meeting, and we hope to give our perspective on Lydian's data and Lydian's information. We are independent of Lydian and any other sources. We are doing the kind of evaluation that we would do in the United States, Canada, and Australia. For my talk, I'm going to show some pictures of the mine facilities and talk about the geology of the deposit. And a lot of what I'm talking about is predictions about the way these materials will behave in the environment and how they will affect water quality. And our dispute is not with the data. We're using Lydian's data. We're using the same data and information that Lydian has, but we have a different interpretation of much of their data. This is a slide that shows the mine facilities. There are 3 open pits. 2 of them will be joined together, and the other one will be to the north. Okay. This is the waste rock storage facility, so when they take the ore out of the ground, some of it is ore and some of it is waste. They put the waste here. The ore goes to this area, which is near the Arbor River, and this is where they put the cyanide solution and extract the gold. The geology of this site has been explained by Lydian as being fairly simple, that there is an upper volcanic layer and a lower volcanic layer. Instead, what we see when we look at a cross-section through the earth of this deposit is that the upper volcanic, which is in green and contains the ore and some waste, is mixed very much with the lower volcanics, which does not contain the ore and has a higher sulfide content. If it has a higher iron sulfide content, it's much more likely to produce acid drainage. So the green material has less of this sulfide, and the red has more. But from a practical perspective, it's going to be hard to separate these out. So we believe that some of the red material that has the bad minerals in it is going to go into the ore. So geochemical testing is an academic subject that most people don't think about, but it's very important in mining because it's used to estimate the potential environmental behavior of all these materials that they're digging out of the ground and putting on the surface. And it's especially important because these materials will stay on the surface forever. Some mines take their ore off-site, other mines don't have waste, but for Amulsar, all the waste, all the ore, everything will remain on the site forever. And the deposit is not mined yet, so this is an opportunity to improve the environmental performance, and we have a difference of opinion about the mitigation measures they're using to try to prevent environmental contamination. So we have all these tests and numbers, but then there's the real world. This is a mine in northern Peru that has some similarities to the Amulsar deposit. It's called the Yanacocha mine. It's also volcanic, and it also has acid generation potential. In the beginning of mining at the Yanacocha mine, this is pH here, which is a measure of acidity. The lower it is here, the more acidic. So when mining started, and this is time here, when mining started, the water coming out of this area was neutral. It was not acidic. Over time, as mining progressed, the acidity, there was more and more and more acidity, and it went down to a low pH below 3. Then the mine decided, uh-oh, we better do something about this. They added some lime, and the pH went up again, but not as high as it was in the beginning. And we feel that there's potential for this same situation to happen at Amulsar. So what you look at when you're looking at acid generation potential is the balance between minerals that consume acid and minerals that generate acid. If you have a lot of minerals that consume acid, you're not going to have that much acid drainage. And the most important mineral to consume acid is called calcite. Seashells are made out of calcite. And Lydian did some limited mineralogic analyses and they found no calcite on the site. The mineral that is most likely to produce acid is called pyrite. It's also known as fool's gold because it looks like gold, but it is not. And there's quite a bit of pyrite in some of the samples, especially in the lower volcanics, which were red in the previous slide. So at Amulsar, there is not a good balance between minerals that consume and produce acid. There's much more of the minerals that produce acid, and this is why we're concerned about it. So what happens when acid drainage forms? This slide shows the black dots here are pH, and this is time here. So these are the tests. They take cores out of the earth during exploration. They take that and cut it up into small pieces, and then they put it in a column. They put air through it, and then once a week they pour water over the top to simulate what would happen out in the field. Then they collect the water at the bottom and they make measurements. In this case, the pH stayed at a neutral pH for almost a year. Okay? And then it started dropping. When that happens, yeah, so this is the lag time. It took that long for it to produce acid. So this doesn't happen immediately at mines. It can take a while. So the pH drops, and at the same time, that causes the metal concentrations to increase. And a lot of these metals are very toxic to aquatic life and to humans. So we evaluated Lydian's data and information and found that there was a lot of uncertainty because of the way they did their analyses. There were too few samples. There are no strict rules, but for the amount of material, which is quite a lot that they plan to remove from the earth, you would need at least 100 more samples for waste than what they did. Also, the samples did not represent the full range of rocks that were out there. We have a different interpretation of the results, and also their long-term leach tests were not run for long enough. And the uncertainty that I evaluated shows that there was an underestimation of risk because of these reasons. So this slide shows the sulfide content, and I mentioned before, the more sulfide, the more likely it is to produce acid. So if you have more sulfide, these are going to be more acid generating. And the blue dots show the range of the waste that will be produced at Amulsar. And the orange dots are the ones that they tested for long-term leaching. Yeah. So they did not take any of the high sulfide materials to do the long-term leach test to see what would leach out of these materials over the long term. So this is why I feel that they have underestimated the potential for acid generation at the site. These are two slides that show the same data. On the left, this is Lydian's approach to interpreting the data. They used a technique where you subtract the acid production from the neutralizing potential, and anything below 20 is considered potentially acid generating. And it might be hard to see here, but it's only the green samples, and that is the upper volcanics, that they are saying will be potentially acid producing. International best practice is to look at the same results a different way, using a ratio. So anything below 1 is considered acid generating, potentially acid generating. And you can see that a lot more of the samples, all of these over here that were not considered acid generating, are considered potentially acid generating if you use this international best practice approach. So this is another reason I feel that they have underestimated the acid generation potential. So this is another way to look at acid generation potential that also looks at what kind of toxic metals and other constituents might be leaching out of the rock when it's pulled up onto the surface. Okay. This is again pH. Okay, so the lower it is here, the more acidic it is. And we have the red are the lower volcanics, which have more sulfide. The blue are the upper volcanics. And this is time, on those columns where you're pouring water over the top every week. And you can see that all of the red samples produced acid. Anything below a pH of 6 is considered acidic. And some of these became acidic immediately. This is very fast for, compared to a lot of the other mine sites that I've evaluated. Some of them took a little longer, but if you remember that other slide I showed you with the lag time, that one didn't produce acid until week 40. A lot of these are producing acid much sooner. The blue ones, the one that they let go for longer, did produce acid, and this is the material that Lydian has said probably will not produce acid. There were 2 other ones that they just cut off. They stopped too short. So would those have produced acid or not? So that leads to the uncertainty of the analysis. Okay. And these are results from the same test. They put the water over the column and measured what the water quality was coming out. But this is for arsenic, which is toxic to humans. And this is the arsenic concentration. The higher it is here, the higher the arsenic concentration. These are the same tests and time. This is the US standard, drinking water standard for arsenic. It's also used by most other countries that have mining. And you can see that both the blue and the red samples, the upper and the lower volcanics, produced arsenic concentrations that are above the drinking water standard. So arsenic is an important contaminant of concern for the Amulsar project. There are a number of statements that Lydian made either in their documents or to the press that we take issue with. One is that, and this was in the environmental and social impact assessment, it said that the project is not likely to experience elevated lead, arsenic, or zinc concentrations in acid-impacted waters. And I showed you earlier this graph that showed that almost all of the samples that they let go for long enough produced acid. So when you look at those samples, you see the higher concentrations of arsenic, that's the slide I just showed you, but also some of them produced high lead concentrations and high zinc concentrations. So using Lydian's own data, we can see that this statement is not correct. I also feel that Lydian underestimated the number of contaminants of concern at this site. And this is very important. As Andre will discuss later, you need to know what the contaminants of concern are to design a good treatment approach to prevent these contaminants from reaching streams and rivers and reservoirs. They have a limited number of metals and other contaminants that they listed, but looking at their geochemical testing results, we have a much longer list. And some of these are difficult to remove in treatment systems, so it's very important to know these. Now this doesn't say what the concentrations are, it just shows using the geochemical results that these are ones that you need to watch out for and you need to design a good treatment system for. Another statement made by Lydian is that no contaminants will ever be discharged to the natural environment, so not only Jermuk, but any water in the region will not be impacted by mine operations. This is an amazing statement, and it's generally doesn't hold true at mines. About 12 years ago, I did a study with a mining engineer from Montana, and we reviewed environmental impact statements for 71 large mines in the United States. And we looked at their predictions for water quality in the environmental impact statements. And then for 25 of them, we compared to what actually happened during mining. And what we found was that 75% of the mines underestimated the impact to water quality. And if the mine was close to water, if it had streams nearby or shallow groundwater, and it had a moderate to high potential to leach metals and acid the way Amulsar does, and Amulsar also is located very close to water in a sensitive environment, about 90% of those exceeded water quality standards. So it's even more important to have important environmental controls when you are close to water and you have the kind of rock that will produce acid and leach metals. And we also looked at why these problems were happening. And what we found was that the errors were mostly due to poor geochemical characterization and hydrologic characterization and failure of mitigation measures. So these are the measures put in place to prevent contamination. And what we found was, yes, these systems were put in place, but they did not function properly in many sites. The environmental and social impacts assessment also said that baseline water quality in the Amulsar project area is generally good or very good, and does not appear to be notably affected by natural acid drainage. There are some naturally acidic springs in the area, kind of east of the pits, but generally the water quality in the area is very good. The other thing about the water quality is that the three rivers that drain the site, the Dar, the Arka, and the Voratan, and the tributaries that go into them, have very low hardness. Hardness is a measure of the calcium and magnesium content of the water. And if the hardness is low, the metals that go into that water from the mine site will have a higher toxicity to fish. These waters also have low alkalinity, which, if you remember the balance thing, the alkalinity is what can counteract and neutralize the acidity. But these streams have very low alkalinity, they're mountain streams, and they will not be able to counteract the acidity coming from the mine. I just wanted to show, don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but Lydian made predictions about the kind of water that will be coming out of the waste rock facility. And this is my major concern for this site, actually, is the waste rock facility. And you can see that the ARPA has very stringent standards because Armenia wants to protect the water quality. And a lot of these aluminum, here, arsenic, cadmium, all of these are toxic metals, aluminum less so, but certainly arsenic and cadmium, and nickel, and a lot of the other constituents here are higher than the ARPA standards. And they're saying this is the kind of water that's going to be coming out of the waste rock dump. The waste rock dump is not lined, and it doesn't have a good mitigation approach for preventing contamination, and Andre will talk about that. And this is a map of the site again, but it's a little different. These are the open pits. Right? This is the waste rock facility that I'm the most concerned about. This is the heap leach facility where they put the gold and apply the cyanide solution to extract the gold. And this reflects a model that Lydian's consultants did to look at groundwater flow paths. So what direction is groundwater going to flow in from these mine and contaminant sources? And if water flows and contaminants come out, the contaminants will flow along these lines as well. And the different colors are different levels of concern, and this is during mine operation. And they have red as the highest concern coming from the heap leach facility, but also from the open pit. And you can see that these flow paths go to all of the rivers in the area. And some of them, and I highlighted these, go north of the Ketchup Reservoir and will go into the upper Arca and into the Ketchup Reservoir, which then goes into Lake Sebon. There are also some lines that go into the Ketchup Reservoir directly from the waste rock facility. This is the tunnel that goes from the Andara Reservoir to the Ketchup Reservoir. And Lydian does predict that some of the contaminants will go into this tunnel after 130 years. So our great-grandchildren should be concerned about that, but we should too, because this model does not take into account the many, many faults that are in the area. When contaminants in water get into a fault, they can move very quickly to these receptors. So in summary, I've shown you that nearly all of the samples of waste and ore, I didn't talk about ore, but all but one sample of ore is also potentially acid generating and will leach metals. And all of these materials will remain on the surface forever. So Amulsar could be into a perpetual treatment situation where they would need to treat water for a very, very long time. Lydian's statements about low risk do not reflect the test results. We feel that there is a high risk of impact, negative impact to these waters. This underestimation of risk leads to not designing the mitigation measures well enough, because they're saying they don't think they're going to have a problem, so they don't use the best international practice mitigation measures. And the water quality in this area is very good, very high quality now, and it's highly threatened by the Amulsar project. Our recommendations on the geochemistry side are that the geochemical testing results need to be reevaluated. More testing needs to be done on representative samples. You remember that the samples with the highest sulfide that will produce acid were not tested for their long-term leaching potential. And then, if you think about all the pathways on that map that I just showed you, the pathways of highest risk need to be taken very seriously and redesign the mitigation measures to reflect the test results. Merci.